My name is Hannah Lawson, and what I'm about to share with you is something that changed my life forever. It was the morning of April 3rd, 2019, a day that started like any other but ended up being the most unforgettable experience of my life. I remember waking up to a beautiful sunrise. The sky was so clear, and the golden light seemed to spill across everything. I couldn't help but pause for a moment and take it in. Looking back now, I wonder if God allowed me to notice that sunrise on purpose, almost like He knew what was coming. I was rushing to get to my morning shift at Mercy General Hospital, where I had been working as an ICU nurse for over 2 decades. After so many years in the hospital, I thought I had seen it all: miracles, heartbreak, moments that felt like the presence of God, and moments that made me question everything. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that morning. As I approached the intersection of Willow and Main, I glanced down at my watch. It was 5:47 a.m. The roads were still quiet, and for a second I felt relieved. But then, in an instant, everything changed. Out of nowhere, a pickup truck came flying through a red light. I barely had time to process what was happening before the truck slammed into the driver's side of my car at full speed. The impact was terrifying. I can still hear the sound of metal twisting and glass exploding around me. My chest felt like it had been crushed, and the pain in my side was like a knife driving deep into my ribs. I remember the taste of blood in my mouth and the cold sensation of air struggling to fill my lungs. Everything started to blur, and soon the world around me began to fade. Then something strange happened, something I still can't fully explain. It felt like I was being lifted, almost like I was floating above my own body. I could see myself inside the wreckage, broken and bloody, and I remember watching the paramedics rush to my side. Their voices sounded far away, like echoes bouncing off walls. I knew they were working hard to save me, but I felt completely disconnected from it all, like I was observing someone else's life. What I didn't realize at the time was that my heart had stopped, and this was just the beginning. I don't remember much about the ambulance ride, but I do know that my heart stopped again once I reached the hospital. The doctors later told me I was technically dead for 7 minutes and 23 seconds. But during that time, I wasn't in the hospital at all, at least not in the way you'd expect. Instead, I found myself in a place that words can barely describe. I didn't see darkness or experience a tunnel like some people describe. Instead, I was suddenly surrounded by a brilliant living light. It wasn't just bright, it felt alive, like it had a presence of its own. The light wasn't blinding or harsh. It was warm and comforting, like being wrapped in the safest embrace imaginable. It's hard to explain, but somehow I knew that this light knew me, not just my name or my face, but everything about me. My thoughts, my struggles, my regrets. Every part of my life was fully known by this presence, yet I felt no judgment at all. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of love, stronger than anything I've ever felt before. As I stood there in that light, I became aware that I wasn't alone. Out of the brightness, I began to see shapes forming, beings unlike anything I had ever seen. They were massive, yet graceful, and their movements seemed impossibly precise. These beings were made of wheels within wheels, just like the vision described in the book of Ezekiel. Their wheels spun in every direction at once, yet they never seemed chaotic. Each movement felt purposeful, as if they were part of some divine rhythm. The wheels were covered in what appeared to be eyes, glowing like jewels, yet somehow alive, constantly shifting, blinking and watching. But these weren't ordinary eyes. It felt like they could see everything at once. They didn't just look at things, they seemed to understand them, to know them deeply and completely. I later learned these beings were called the ofanim, and their presence was unlike anything I've ever encountered. It was as if they were constantly in motion, weaving together events, timing, and divine order in ways my mind couldn't even begin to comprehend. At that moment, I knew these beings were powerful, but they didn't act on their own. They were moving according to God's perfect plan, ensuring everything unfolded exactly as it was meant to. As I stood there watching the ofanim, I felt an incredible sense of awe. Their presence was powerful, almost overwhelming, yet I felt no fear. Instead, there was this deep understanding that they were working to fulfill God's will, moving with purpose that stretched far beyond what we could ever grasp. The way they turned and spun, without ever colliding, without a single wasted motion, felt like watching the gears of a perfect clock. Every movement seemed to control moments in time, and I knew that these beings weren't just observing. They were actively influencing the course of events in ways I could barely comprehend. Then, something even more incredible happened. The light shifted, and out of it emerged another group of beings, ones that looked entirely different, but just as powerful. These were the cherubim, and their presence took my breath away. Each of them had 4 faces, one like a human, one like a lion, one like an ox, and one like an eagle. The faces seemed to shift and change, yet they never lost their identity. It felt as if each face represented something essential: humanity, strength, service, and vision. Their 6 wings stretched out wide, and when they moved, they created waves in the air, almost like ripples across water. Except these ripples seemed to bend reality itself. And then I heard it, a sound unlike anything I can describe. It was powerful yet peaceful, like the roar of an ocean combined with the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. It seemed to come from the cherubim's wings, filling the entire space around me. The sound seemed to carry purpose, like a constant declaration of God's glory. In that moment, I realized these beings weren't just powerful, they were worshipers. Everything they did, every movement, every sound, was an act of complete devotion to God. It was as if their very existence revolved around praising Him. Suddenly, the light seemed to part like a curtain, and that's when I saw Him, Jesus. He was seated on a throne made of living sapphire, and His presence was unlike anything I had ever known. There was no doubt in my mind this was the Son of God. His face was both familiar and unlike anything I could describe, and His eyes held a depth that felt endless. When He looked at me, I knew He saw everything, my fears, my mistakes, my doubts. Yet I didn't feel ashamed. Instead, I felt loved in a way I never thought possible. As I stood before Him, I felt frozen, not out of fear, but because His presence was so overwhelming. It was as if His love poured over me, filling every empty space inside me. His eyes weren't just looking at me, they were looking through me, past my regrets, past my insecurities, past every mistake I had ever made. Yet despite all of that, His expression was nothing but full of compassion. There was no anger, no disappointment, only love. A love so deep, so powerful, that I couldn't help but break down in tears. Then He spoke, not with words like we speak here on earth, but in a way that seemed to bypass my ears and go straight into my soul. "Hannah, my child," He said, "I have brought you here to show you what few have seen, "Do not be afraid." His voice wasn't loud, yet it filled everything around me, strong, yet gentle at the same time. Every word seemed to carry a weight that I could feel inside my chest. When he spoke my name, I knew he wasn't just addressing me, he knew me. He knew my life, my struggles, my prayers, even the ones I had whispered in desperation, thinking no one was listening. Jesus then reached out his hand, and suddenly I felt as though I was being drawn closer to him. As I moved toward him, it was like the space around us shifted, and I began to see things, moments, scenes, visions, unfolding right before my eyes. He showed me things that shook me to my core. I saw angels, not just the powerful beings like the ofanim and cherubim, but guardian angels walking beside people here on earth. They looked so ordinary at first, yet I realized they were anything but. These angels moved with strength and purpose, shielding people from dangers they never even knew were there. I saw them standing beside hospital beds, guiding doctors' hands. I saw them in schools, protecting children from harm. I even saw them in government buildings, working to influence decisions and protect against spiritual attacks. Then Jesus showed me something even more incredible, my own accident. I watched as the moment unfolded from a different perspective, one I had never imagined. I saw my car at the intersection, and I saw the truck speeding toward me. But this time I saw the angels too. There were 3 of them, mighty and powerful, positioned around my vehicle. Just before impact, they moved in unison. One of them seemed to press against the side of my car, softening the blow. Another reached into the truck itself, shielding the driver from what could have been fatal injuries. The third stood over me, their hand hovering above my chest, and I realized they were holding back something, some unseen force that had been trying to take my life. It was then that I understood. My survival hadn't just been luck, and it hadn't just been the skill of the paramedics or doctors. God's angels had been fighting for me the entire time. As I watched those angels protect me during the accident, I felt overwhelmed with emotion. I had always believed in God, but I never fully understood just how involved He truly is, how His hand is constantly at work, even in the moments we don't see. Seeing those angels risk everything to protect me filled me with gratitude I can't even put into words. But what struck me even more was what Jesus showed me next. He revealed how angels weren't just present in moments of crisis. They were constantly moving throughout the world, unseen yet actively working. I saw angels standing beside people who were completely unaware of their presence, guiding, comforting, and protecting. I watched a young mother driving home late at night, exhausted and barely able to keep her eyes open. Her car began drifting toward oncoming traffic, and in that instant, an angel gently touched her shoulder, waking her just in time to avoid disaster. I saw angels in hospital rooms, standing beside doctors and nurses as they worked to save lives. I saw one angel whispering something into a surgeon's ear, guiding his hands to make an incision that ended up saving a patient who was on the brink of death. I saw angels protecting children, standing guard beside their beds at night, watching over them like silent warriors. And then Jesus showed me something that shook me to my core. He revealed that angels aren't just fighting physical dangers. They're constantly battling spiritual forces as well. I witnessed a spiritual battle unlike anything I'd ever imagined. Dark, shadowy figures move through people's lives, stirring fear, confusion, and hopelessness. But each time those dark forces tried to take hold, angels would step in. I watched angels place their hands on people's shoulders, filling them with peace just before they were about to make a destructive decision. I saw angels standing in doorways, blocking demonic forces from entering homes. I even saw angels surrounding entire churches, shielding them from unseen attacks that threatened to tear them apart. It was then that Jesus spoke again. "My angels are always at work," he told me, "but so many of my people have forgotten they are there." His words broke my heart. I realized how often we go through life feeling abandoned, unaware that God's messengers are constantly fighting battles on our behalf, battles we never even know are happening. As Jesus continued to speak, his words filled me with both comfort and urgency. He told me that angels have been working among us since the very beginning, not just in moments we read about in Scripture, but in everyday life even now. I saw glimpses of biblical moments, angels appearing to Abraham, guiding Moses and strengthening Jesus himself during his time in the wilderness. But then he showed me something that felt far more personal. He showed me how angels had been present throughout my own life. I watched scenes from my childhood unfold before me, moments I had long forgotten. There was a time when I was just a little girl, playing outside near a busy street. I saw myself chasing after a ball that had rolled dangerously close to the road. Just before I could run into traffic, an unseen force seemed to pull me back. At the time, I thought I had simply tripped, but now I knew the truth. An angel had been there, saving me from what could have been a fatal accident. I saw another moment years later when I had been struggling with depression, feeling like my life had no purpose. Jesus showed me that an angel had been near me then too, whispering encouragement into my heart, stirring thoughts of hope and reminding me that I wasn't alone. Then Jesus revealed something I'll never forget. He showed me that angels aren't just protectors, they're messengers as well. I watched as countless prayers rose from earth like pulses of light, each one moving toward heaven. Some were desperate cries for help, others were whispered words of gratitude, and some were prayers so quiet and broken they barely formed words at all. Each one was precious, and none of them were ignored. I watched as angels carried these prayers upward, bringing them before God's throne. What amazed me most was that some prayers seemed to set off a chain reaction, angels being sent in all directions, working to bring about the answers in ways people couldn't see. Sometimes the answers came immediately, while other times they required angels to carefully shift events, placing people in the right place at the right time. I realized that even the prayers I had thought went unanswered had actually been heard. It was just that God's plan had required things to unfold in ways I hadn't understood. Jesus told me that while angels are powerful, they are not to be worshipped or glorified. They are my servants, he said. They follow my will, and their purpose is to reveal my glory, not their own. He made it clear that angels were never meant to replace our connection to him. Instead, they are part of his divine plan to guide, protect, and fulfill his purposes in our lives. As I stood there, Jesus' words echoed in my mind, filling me with both comfort and urgency. He told me that his angels are more active now than ever before, constantly working to guide, protect, and fight for his people. He showed me scenes of intense spiritual warfare, battles that most of us never see but are happening all around us. I watched as dark, shadowy figures crept into people's lives, whispering lies of fear, doubt, and hopelessness. These forces seemed relentless, trying to break people down from the inside out. But each time those dark whispers tried to take hold, I saw angels stepping in, powerful and unwavering. I watched as an angel stood beside a young man who was drowning in despair, hopelessness consuming him. I could feel his pain, it was overwhelming, and I knew he was moments away from ending his life. But before he could act, an angel appeared beside him. The angel didn't speak, but just being there seemed to fill the room with peace. The young man's breathing slowed and tears filled his eyes. It was as if that simple presence had reminded him that God still loved him, that his life still had purpose. Jesus turned to me with a serious expression. "My angels are more active now than ever," he said. "But so many of my people don't realize they are there. They feel forgotten, yet they are never alone." His voice was filled with both love and urgency, and I knew this was something he desperately wanted me to share. Then he looked at me and said something I wasn't expecting. "It's not your time yet. You must return and tell them what you've seen." The moment Jesus told me it wasn't my time, I felt my heart sink. Part of me didn't want to leave. I didn't want to step away from the overwhelming peace and love I felt in his presence. But before I could even process what was happening, I felt his hand gently touch my forehead. In an instant, everything shifted. I felt like I was being pulled backward, almost as if I was being carried by a powerful current. The ofanim, those incredible wheels within wheels, moved alongside me. Their endless rotations seemed to form a kind of pathway, guiding me back to where I had come from. The cherubim raised their wings once again, and that incredible sound, like rushing waters blended with heavenly music, filled the air around me. It wasn't frightening. It felt like a reminder that I wasn't going back alone. God's presence and his angels would still be with me. The next thing I knew, I was opening my eyes in a hospital bed. My body felt weak, and I could barely move, but I was awake, alive. I remember seeing the stunned look on the doctor's face. They told me that I had been gone for over 7 minutes, and that it was a miracle I had survived without brain damage. They couldn't explain it, but I knew exactly what had happened. God's angels had been fighting for me the entire time. As I lay there in that hospital bed, memories of what I had seen felt so fresh, so real, like I had just returned from another world. The doctors kept calling it a miracle, and deep down, I knew they were right. But what they didn't know was that my survival wasn't just about skilled hands or medical science. I had seen firsthand how God's angels had intervened. Even after I was stable, I couldn't stop thinking about the visions Jesus had shown me. I remembered the angels in the hospital room, guiding the doctor's hands. I remembered the angel who stood by the man drowning in despair, silently saving him from a decision that would have ended his life. I remembered the ofanim, constantly moving in perfect synchronization, turning, spinning, and aligning moments in ways I still can't fully understand. Most of all, I remembered what Jesus had said. My angels are more active now than ever before. That truth stayed with me, and once I was well enough to leave the hospital, I knew I couldn't keep it to myself. Jesus had sent me back with a purpose, to tell others what I had seen and to remind people that no matter how lost or alone they may feel, they are never forgotten. God's angels are always near, protecting, guiding, and fighting for us in ways we may never see. Since that day, my life has never been the same. I can't walk into a room without wondering what's happening in the spiritual realm. What battles might be unfolding that we can't see? There have been moments since my experience when I felt that presence again, that quiet yet powerful sense that angels are near. Once, while visiting a close friend in the hospital, I felt it so strongly I couldn't ignore it. As I stood beside her bed, I knew that an angel was there, standing guard over her just like they had done for me. I've also started to notice patterns I never paid attention to before. Sometimes it's the way light moves across a room, or how certain moments unfold in ways that feel too perfect to be a coincidence. It's like God's presence and His angels are woven into the very details of our lives. And now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it. I know those moments aren't random. They're reminders that God's hand is always at work, even when we don't realize it. I don't share my story to scare people or to make angels seem larger than God. They aren't. They exist only to carry out His will. But I do share this to remind people of one thing: you are never alone. No matter how dark life may feel, no matter how heavy your burdens may be, God's angels are constantly moving, constantly fighting to protect and guide you. Even in the moments when you feel forgotten, heaven has not turned its back on you. God is closer than you know, and His angels are always by your side. If my story has touched you, I ask you to share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more testimonies like this one. If you've ever felt like God wasn't listening, I promise you He is. He always has been. You are never alone.